Okay. It was 1 o'clock. So again, thank you for joining us. I'm Joe Starnes, CEO of Ombre. This is Kimberly Griffith, our head of science. And today we're going to be talking about GLP-1 and its impact on the gut. So here's the agenda for today. I'm going to take about 5 minutes. I'll be as quick as I can to introduce myself and Kimberly and talk a little bit about Ombre. And then we're going to talk about GLP-1. So how the microbiome impacts metabolic function and may influence your experience on GLP-1. Um, the latest science on the interactions between GLP-1 and gut hormone, and then practical strategies to support your gut. And really what this is all about is if you've gone on a GLP-1 medication, what you eat, how you eat, like your lifestyle's probably changed pretty dramatically. And those changes can have a huge impact on your gut health. And then those impacts on your gut health you feel throughout your life, um, throughout your daily life, right? So we're just going to talk about those today. A couple admin things. So we do have dashboard access to your dashboard. There's a link in the chat if you've already taken the test, just to make it easy to go look at your results. We have a link to our blog articles. So we're all about education. We're all about sharing free education with y'all. If you have any questions that may be answered in the blog, it's probably answered in the blog. We've got a really good library of articles in there, so go check it out. We do have a mobile app. Right now, it's pretty limited. But sign up for our emails on our website if you haven't already. Once you go to the homepage, there's a pop-up because we're launching an AI coach hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And it really takes all the knowledge that we've compiled, and then we've set some guardrails around it so it won't give you wonky answers like some of the just general open models will. And then lastly, a link to the website if you want to go look at the probiotics or the test. Um, so with all that being said, the one thing that I'll ask of all of you, put your questions in the Q&A. These things go way better when we can answer your questions and when we can interact, especially at the end, and y'all get a bunch more value out of it too. So please put your questions in the Q&A. We already got one that said the chat's disabled. Unfortunately, that's intentional, and it's just based on some history around some conversations that have gone on in the chat. But we do use the Q&A to interact with you all. So I'm reading it. I'll be reading it throughout the presentation, and then we'll answer your questions at the end. If you have questions that are specific to you, generally, specific to you, and we can't answer them during the webinar. Generally, we'll try and get you an email and get you as thorough an answer as we can. So with that, I will stop talking. 2 minutes, not five. So Kimberly, you can take
Yeah.
it away. And again, thanks everybody for attending. We're going on mute.
Right. Thank you, Joe. Yes, thank everyone for attending this webinar. My name is Kimberly Griffith. I'm a functional medicine nutritionist that has spent the past decade or so studying the microbial ecosystems and how they affect our health. The majority of that time has been spent on the gut microbiome, learning how to modulate it for our best health outcomes through diets, supplements, lifestyle factors, and influencers are pretty huge right now. So, with that, let's get into our webinar. All right, let's start with just a definition of what GLP-1 is and what it does. So, GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. It's a hormone produced in the intestinal L cells. It's released in response to a meal. It enhances insulin secretion. It regulates our appetite, promotes satiety, so it keeps us feeling full longer, which has an effect on losing weight, and then slows gastric emptying to improve nutrient absorption. So, you do create GLP-1 naturally in your body, but there are popular medications that we're going to talk about today that mimic these hormones to help with specific disease states. And these are called GLP-1 receptor agonists. You may be on one, you may have heard of one. Ozempic, Wegovy, Zepbound are some common names. And again, they mimic the effects of the body's natural GLP-1 hormone. And they are created to use against diabetes and support weight loss. Next slide, please. So, just a little review of what I said. GLP-1 is released in response to a meal, but our microbiota, the collection of microorganisms that reside in our gastrointestinal tract, actually plays a pretty large role when it comes to GLP-1 response and efficacy. And that's what we're going to talk about. So most people know that the microbiome influences our health, but drastically influences our metabolic health. Um, these bacteria and microorganisms, they do not only help initiate GLP-1 release, but they also influence how many L cells there are that release GLP-1. So the microbiota composition has an effect on your therapeutic efficacy as well. There's something called responders and non-responders. Some people don't respond well to these medications. And based on the literature, it's because they have a very dysbiotic state of their microbiome. I put right here new and limited because I just wanted to remember to tell you like this is a very new area of study. When we're talking about the microbiome's effect on GLP-1 medications and vice versa, I think there were around 36 to 38 studies I found. This is compared to like 50,000 studies on the gut microbiome and hundreds of thousands of studies on the different microbial ecosystems. So this is very new, but I'm going to do my best to summarize what the literature says so you can have some takeaways. But the main takeaway of this page is that the microbiota influences our GLP-1 production, and the balance of your microbiota also influences the efficacy of your GLP-1 receptor agonist if you're on one. All right, so a question came up in a previous webinar asking, how do these medications affect my microbiome? And that's a great question and one we should consider and one I wanted to dig into. Overall, it seems to have a positive effect on our microbial composition. They have shown to increase our beneficial bacteria, such as lactobacillus, bifidobacteria, fecalibacterium, akkermansia. All of these are tied to metabolic health. They've generally shown to decrease our pro-inflammatory pathogenic bacteria, decreasing something called lipopolysaccharides that are associated with inflammation. I have here that there's mixed results because there are a few results showing negative impacts, and I'll kind of talk about why that may be in a few slides. But overall, these medications are shown to actually have a positive effect on our beneficial bacteria. And then microbial diversity. Diversity, your gut diversity and your microbiome is tied, or microbiota is tied to health benefits. So we want a very diverse gut microbiome. Within the literature, overall, it seems to show that when on these medications, they can increase diversity specifically in our short chain fatty acid producer species, which is a good thing. I made note that lower diversity is linked to inflammation and gut permeability in case someone doesn't know where you should lie with diversity. You want high diversity, and based on the research, these medications tend to increase diversity. And then they reverse obesity associated profiles. When we look at type 2 diabetes and obese individuals, their profiles, they tend to have very low levels of beneficial bacteria that support metabolic health, that trigger the GLP-1 production naturally, and higher levels of pro-inflammatory bacteria. So these medications have shown to shift that obesity associated profile, which is a good thing. All right, so how do GLP-1 receptor agonists affect our gut barrier and inflammation? We know inflammation is tied to negative effects on our metabolic health. So when it comes to the gut barrier integrity, it has been shown to strengthen the tight junction proteins, so reducing gut permeability. Something we call leaky gut or weak gut lining has a negative effect on our natural GLP-1 production because it increases inflammation. So the research has shown that these medications actually can help lower endotoxin exposure and decrease systemic inflammation. And then they also have an anti-inflammatory action. GLP-1 receptor activation decreases intestinal inflammatory cytokines. So overall, when it comes to the strength of our gut lining, they tend to have a positive effect on our gut lining. And so, what about the effects on microbial metabolites? Many of our microbial metabolites are responsible for our natural GLP-1 production. Based on the literature, there's an increase in short chain fatty acids, and partly because there's an increase in the beneficial bacteria. But short chain fatty acid production upregulates intestinal GLP-1 production. So it increases your natural GLP-1 production, which improves insulin sensitivity, gut health, metabolic regulation. Something to just keep in mind when we talk about the foods is that a healthy microbiome only amplifies the efficacy of your GLP-1 therapies and also sets you up for success to transition off them in time. They also alter bile acid metabolism, modification of bile acid pool, and receptor signaling, influencing metabolic and inflammatory pathways in a positive way. So these GLP-1 medications can help reshape your microbiota and the associated metabolites, improving glycemic control and weight management. So this is just a summary page, what was pulled in from the literature showing us there tends to be a positive effect on our gut microbiome in responders. And I found this super encouraging because it helps people set up for a successful transition to eventually focus on supporting their natural GLP-1 production for their metabolic health. So again, we see a positive shift on our bacterial composition. A lot of those bacteria that support metabolic health tend to go up, potentially healthier gut flora. Microbial diversity tends to go up, improving microbiome resilience. And then remember, we want a tight gut lining to decrease inflammation systemically. So there seems to be a positive effect on our gut barrier and those tight junction, stronger gut barrier function, higher levels of those short chain fatty acids that are going to trigger your natural GLP-1 release. So acetate, butyrate, propionate. So better metabolic and glycemic control. And then a healthier microbiota linked with improved GLP-1 signaling. That's just a summary statement. So more sustained health benefits, not just with your metabolic health, but overall health. So a question I had, which I'm sure some of you may have too, is like, how is this happening? What's the mechanism of action? How do these medications positively affect our gut microbiome? So it seems to be, based on the research, the microbiome changes occur due to slower gastric emptying, which alters transit time and also nutrient exposure along the pathway. GLP-1 therapies also shift the gut's internal environment, specifically the pH. We know certain bacteria flourish at certain pH levels, nutrient availability, and then dietary pattern. This is not the case for everybody. For some individuals, their diets are not reflective of a health promoting, gut promoting, microbial influencing in a positive direction diet. But what they're finding overall is that most people are reducing their amount of high sugar, high fat foods. And so there seems to be a positive effect on the microbial composition. And then, as I mentioned, there are some mixed results. The majority of the literature focuses on the positive effects, but there are a few negative effects on a few of the studies. And the differences that have been called out have been between the microbiota of responders and non-responders, specifically in that really dysbiotic state. The variability in the study populations. Also, I don't have this on here, but the different medications tend to have different effects, it looks like. Health conditions, and then dietary habits. And then short study durations that may not capture the long-term microbiome adaptation while on the medication. All right, so how do we optimize the efficacy of these medications and successfully transition to support our natural GLP-1 production for metabolic health? I think that's everybody's end goal that are on any of these medications. What we have to remember is the gut microbiome directly influences GLP-1 secretion. So our approach really needs to be gut focused, gut microbiome focused. We need mindful food choices that nourish these good metabolic health promoting bacteria. A lot of them are going to incorporate fiber-rich foods. We know when we eat certain fibers, our bacteria create short-chain fatty acids that trigger GLP-1 release. Foods that result in tryptophan. Tryptophans are essential amino acids found in foods like turkey, eggs, cheese, dairy. If you want plant-based options, that's soy, legumes, pumpkin seeds, and oats. Um, and then these are metabolized by our gut bacteria, and they create that metabolite that triggers GLP-1 secretion by our L cells. It's a lot of our lactobacillus species that are working this pathway with tryptophan. And then gut health, focusing on this is areas kind of supplements, prebiotics and probiotics that directly support your gut microbiome to set you up for a great transition over to your natural GLP-1 support. So prebiotics, by definition, are food sources that nourish your health promoting bacteria. When we're thinking about metabolic health and GLP-1 specifically, we're thinking of partially hydrolyzed guar gum or resistant starches have shown in the literature to increase GLP-1. And then probiotics. I always like to list a few strains out because not all probiotics are the same and their efficacy is not the same. And it's really important to know the strains and the mechanism of action you're looking for. So Bacillus subtilis optibium BS50 and Lactobacillus rhamnosus LGG are two strains that have shown to increase GLP-1 production. And then lifestyle influencers, good sleep habits, stress management, exercise, they all reinforce that natural GLP-1 production, and they also help with inflammation. If you're on these medications, we want to keep our inflammation as low as possible. So we're maximizing the efficacy of these medications. So again, we can eventually transition off of them. I took this slide off a previous webinar I did on the webinar was just on how to increase your natural GLP-1 production, but it works the same here. The goal is to increase your beneficial bacteria to support your gut health, support your metabolic health, to have adequate levels of that GLP-1 production. So we want to look at polyphenol-rich foods, berries, pomegranates, coffee, apples, always keep the skin on, grapes, dark chocolate, and then fiber-rich foods. I think some of the latest numbers are Americans eat between 10 and 13% of their required fiber a day. We want to hit closer to 25 to 35 grams. If you're thinking about nourishing those good gut bacteria, that's a lot of their food sources right there. And then protein, omega-3 fatty fats. I just talked about tryptophan. They help regulate that GLP-1 secretion and then keep a tight gut barrier that's going to decrease the amount of systemic inflammation in your body. Fermented foods add beneficial bacteria that support GLP-1 signaling. But when you're looking at yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, just make sure you keep in mind the sugar content on those. And then increasing diversity on your plates. These bacteria are like us. They all desire different food sources. So build a very diverse plate. I like to say aim for 5 to 10 different plant-based food sources a day with some proteins. Just make it as colorful as possible. And then I wanted to end with nutritional strategies to combat GI issues. That question came in a few times. Sometimes it's a dosing issue, and that's something you have to take up with your provider. But there are nutritional strategies to keep in mind when you're on these medications. First, focus on hydration to keep digestion moving. Hydration is one of the most important and overlooked ways to manage some of these side effects that you may be experiencing. When we feel full, we tend to drink less, which that's a major issue. And it can also drive our electrolytes down as well. So something easy to think about is like aim for half your body weight in ounces per day. And then maybe just add some lemon or salt to get some electrolytes in there. And then eat slower to reduce overeating, which contributes to that bloating, nauseous, just not feeling good after you eat when you're on these medications. So eat slow, pause, put the fork down, have a drink of water, just slow it down. Eat smaller, spaced out meals. You got to give time for the hormones to reach your brain to say, I'm hungry or I'm not hungry anymore. So, 3 to 4 smaller meals, generally 3 to 4 hours apart, has shown beneficial in the literature. And then really prioritize protein and fiber too in these meals. And then on fiber, if you're not used to eating a lot of fiber, just increase your fiber gradually so you don't deal with some of the common side effects that may be bloating in people that don't have a lot of fiber and then also are on these medications. So increase your fiber slowly, but concentrate on increasing fiber and really think about hydration when it comes to fiber. One of the other main side effects on these medications is constipation, and fiber can really help with that. So focus on incorporating oats, chia seeds, cooked vegetables, ground flax seeds. Those are some things you can add in. Avoiding highly processed or high fat meals. We want to keep meals that are gentle on our digestive system. The type of foods you eat will directly impact how you feel after a meal. And we see this often. You can either set yourself up for success on the transition off the medication by eating the right foods that are going to nourish your metabolic promoting bacteria, or you can take the opportunity to eat some of those meals that you don't get to eat very often because you know you're already losing weight. That's part of the research of why we're seeing a negative effect on the microbiome. Most people don't do that. But just think about if the end goal is to transition and support your metabolic health, stay away from that stuff. Eat gentle foods, gut nourishing foods. If you're having problems with some of the even the healthy foods you may be incorporating, stay away from raw vegetables. Steamed vegetables seem to be easier on most people. Um, Oatmeal, trying to think, protein shakes, rice or bone broth can be helpful with rice. If you make a big batch, keep it in your refrigerator. The process of cooling and then reheating it for a few days actually helps increase resistant starch. And remember, I mentioned resistant starches when it comes to prebiotics. Those definitely feed up your health promoting bacteria. They're going to help you with your metabolic health. Last part, and then stay active after meals. This is really important, even if you're not used to doing it. Just get up and go for a short 10-minute walk, 10-15 minute walk around your health, but that really helps with that discomfort and digestion. It stimulates the gastric motility and helps with bloating and constipation when it comes to these medications. So these are nutritional strategies that help with the GI symptoms, but they're also helping you support a healthy gut microbiome, which is going to help transition you off the medication and support your natural GLP-1 production. And I think that is everyone's end goal. So I have my references on the next page, and then I'll kick it back over to Joe for any questions.